Hey, good Sunday morning, November the 3rd, 2024. I just finished Ed Delahanty's career, 16 years, looking at each individual season from 1888 to 1903. I was curious about this guy because, number one, his career average was 346. Number two, the percentage of hits per game played is an interesting stat. If you play 3,000 games and you get 3,000 hits, exactly, like Roberto Clemente, he didn't play 3,000 games, but he did get 3,000 hits exactly. How about that? But let's say a ball player played 3,000 games exactly and got 3,000 hits exactly. That would be an average of 1.00 hits per game, right? A hit per game play. When I did some research on Ed Delahanty, I see that he played 1,837 games. Okay, not quite 2,000 games. But he got 2,597 hits. That stirred my curiosity. What is the ratio? So I did the division. It came out to 1.41 hits per game played for this guy. So those two things, his ratio of hits per game and his 346 career batting average, stirred my curiosity about this guy. So this video will be a recap of his career and where do we rank him among either the greatest hitters of all time and amongst the greatest players of all time. I make that both of those as a distinction. Greatest player versus greatest hitter. You can have both. But in the greatest player conversation, you got to look at the entire scope of their career and look at all the assets or the, I should say, categories that they performed in. Games, at-bats, runs, hits, doubles, triples, homers, RBIs, stolen bases, walks, fewer strikeouts, or their list of strikeouts, who has the fewest, batting average, on base, slugging, and you look at total bases. The other ones are kind of minor to me, hit by pitch, sacrifices, things like that, sacrifice flies. Let's recap Ed Delahanty. Okay, he played 1,837 games, got 7,510 at-bats. He had the plate appearances of 8,402, but you got to discount the walks and hit by pitch and sacrifices. So I look at at-bats, 7,510. That's a good measure. The other players, you can measure them, but they only have maybe 5,000 at-bats, or even some players just 3,000 at-bats. But you get up to 7,500 at-bats, that's pretty good. Of course, guys like Cobb had over 10,000, 11,000 at-bats. Cal Ripken did too. So did Henry Aaron. So 7,510 at-bats is a good measure. How did he perform? 1,600 runs scored in 1,837 games. That's pretty good ratio. That's not quite one run scored per game played, but he had 10 seasons out of 16 where he scored over 100 runs. So that's significant. That's pretty good. 2,597 at-bats. I gave you the ratio, 1.41 hits per game played. He had 522 doubles in 16 years. But what we can really say is the first couple years didn't play as much. First year, 74 games. Second year, 56 games. And then his last year, 42 games. So if you subtract that, Instead of 16 years, I think he played about 14 and a half almost full seasons. There are some seasons where he missed 20 or 30 games. But I'd say in about a 14 and a half year period, he accumulated his numbers. 522 doubles, 522 doubles in about 14 years. Pretty good. 186 triples, that's good. 101 homers, he's not a home run guy. Back in the 1880s and 90s, really weren't swinging for the fences. If they had the home run, it's normally inside the park. Did you know that Ed Delahanty had 4 homers in one game? He's one of the guys that did it. I believe in that game he had 2 inside the park and 2 over the fence. I'm not sure on that, but that's what I've read somewhere. But he did have a 4-homer game, but he's not a slugger. How about this stat? 1,466 RBIs in about 14 years. So he had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 seasons over 100 RBI. He had 146 one year, and he had 137. So that's a good production as far as RBIs for Ed Delahanty. 456 stolen bases, pretty good. That's for a guy like him who doesn't hit homers. So he had speed. His high in stolen bases, he had 58 one year. 742 walks. Okay, 439 strikeouts and 7,500 at bats. Very good ratio. Didn't strike out that much. His high, he had 60 strikeouts one year. You know, today's age, some of these sluggers are striking out 120, 130, 150 times in a year. So 439 strikeouts, pretty good. 346 career batting average, that's good. He had 3 400 batting seasons. 405, 404, and a 410. And he had one other season where he was 397. That could have been 4 of them. Nobody in baseball history has 4 400 batting seasons. 2 guys came close. Roger Hornsby had 3, plus he had a 397. And Ed Delahanty, 3 with a 397. Hornsby beats him, though, because he had a 424, his high, whereas Delahanty's high was 410. His on base, 411. Not quite in the category of Ted Williams, who was 483. That's the highest. And Ted Williams had some seasons where he was on base 55% of the time. Slugging, 505. That's good. 500 slugging. Of course, the record for slugging, Babe Ruth, 690. 3,794 total bases. So where can we rank Ed Delahanty among the greatest either hitter or player of all time? As far as greatest player, didn't quite play long enough for me to rank him in the top 10. I can't do that. I'd put him somewhere in the top 20, maybe top 30 greatest player of all time. If you look across the board, his numbers. He fell short in home runs, where other players hit 500, 600 homers. Also, the total bases, just 3,700, where other players have 55, 6,000 total bases. Henry Aaron had 6,800 total bases. Also in the on base, 411. He could have been higher. But as far as ratio of runs scored per game and RBIs per game played, it's up there. It's really good. And, of course, the hits per game played is number 1. So as far as greatest hitter of all time, where would I rank him? It's a tough one because you got Ty Cobb number 1 at 366. You got to put him number 1. He has the 12 batting titles. He also had 4,189 hits. Definitely he's number one, greatest hitter of all time. You can't debate that. Sorry. Number two, you got to look at Roger Hornsby's 358 career batting average, and he had 2,200 games, which is more than Delahanty's 1,800. And Hornsby had the 400 batting seasons. He had 2,900 hits. Not quite 3,000. But as far as ratio of hits per game played, Hornsby is at 1.29 hits per game played. Delahanty beats him in that category. Also, Delahanty, did I mention? He's the fastest in Major League history to 2,500 hits. 1,800 games, 2,500 hits. That is the fastest as far as games to hits. Ty Cobb, you may ask, how many games did it take him to get to 2,500 hits? I looked it up. About 2,150. Now, as far as Hornsby, how fast did it take him to get to 2,500 hits? It took him about 1,900 games. I looked it up. So Delahanty is the fastest in Major League history. Here's a something on Delahanty. Oh, as far as ranking the greatest hitters. So you got Cobb and Hornsby. Who would you put third? I did an extensive series of videos on Tris Speaker. This guy is 345 career, and he has 3,500 hits. Now, as far as ratio of hits per game played, he's at 1.26. I looked that up. So Delahanty beats him there. If Delahanty had played more, he would have surpassed Speaker in hits and batting average. But he didn't. Speaker had 2,789 games. Delahanty 1,837. So that's a difference of about 900 games. You know what I did? I did a what if. I did a presuppose scenario. What do I mean? The guy that has the most games played in Major League history is Pete Rose, right? 3,562. And I said, what if Ed Delahanty had played 3,562 games? Well, he ended up with 1,837. In order to reach 3,562, he would have to add 1,725 more games. Could he have done that? Well, you have to play to about 44 like Rose did. He died at age 35. So he would have to have played about another 9 years to get up to 3,500 games. But if he did, and if his ratio is 1.41 hits per game, you'd have to add 2,400 more hits. And you know what his career total would have been if the hypothetical played out? He had 2,597 hits. That's for sure. Add 2,432 more, he would have ended up with 5,029 hits if he had played 3,562 games. We don't know. You're saying, what if he got injured in the last couple of years and his production would have been lower, even though he... What I'm just saying is, if he plays the 3,562, he's not injured, right? He's playing. And if he's averaging the 1.41 over his career, does the career average go down as he get older? Yes, I would give you that. But we're just presupposing, and we're just saying what if. He would have been number one all time in hits. 5,029 presupposed. Is that a stretch? Maybe. But if Pete Rose could play those many number of games, maybe Ed Delahanty is strong enough to do it. We don't know. It's just, he didn't have a history of injuries. He did play the 1,837. You know who's number two in that category as far as what if? Sam Thompson. He played 1,400 games and got 1,988 hits. Almost 2,000 hits in 1,400 games. His ratio is 1.41. But I got Delahanty ahead of him because he has more games played. But if Sam Thompson had played 3,562 games, how many games would he need to do that? You have to add about another 2,000 games because he only played 1,400, right? If you have to add up another 2,100 games. If he's at 1.41 hits per game, you would add another 3,000 hits for Thompson. He would have ended up with 5,022. How about that? Doesn't beat Delahanty. Delahanty would be at 5,029, according to how the pace they were going at. So these two guys are what-if scenarios. We do know that Ty Cobb played 3,000 games. His ratio is 1.38 hits per game, and he ended up with 4,189. But if you add another, let's see, 500 games for Cobb, if he matches Rose. See, Rose is at 4,256, right? Cobb was just a little short, 4,189. But Rose played 528 more games. Add those games for Cobb, he would have ended up with 4,918 hits. How about that scenario? So who's really the number one career hits total guy? You got to give it to Cobb because of the games played. Rose has more hits, but he has 500 more games. Come on. Make it on equal footing. Both play the same number of games. Who's number one? Cobb. Or actually, Delahanty and Thompson would be number one. Cobb would be number three if they play the same number of games across the board. What else can we say about Ed Delahanty? I would say if you're really interested in this guy, there's a book. It's on Amazon. Ed Delahanty in the Emerald Age of Baseball from 1888 to 1903. He talks about his career, his problems, his family life, and of course, the tragic death, which was really mysterious. He's on a bridge near Niagara Falls, and he falls off, and he's gone and dies at the age of 35. Very strange. X-File, I call it. All right, that's a recap of Ed Delahanty. So I've covered in my videos box scores. Started with Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Lou Gehrig, my three favorite. Then I went to Stan Musial. He had 3,600 hits, so I covered him. Then I covered Tris Speaker. Then I covered Ted Williams. Then I covered Tony Gwynn. And I covered Hornsby. I forgot about him. Okay. Ruth, Cobb, Gehrig. Then I did Musial. Then Speaker. Hornsby, Williams, and Gwynn, and now finished Delahanty. Who's next? Well, I like to cover guys that really had outstanding careers. And you can't neglect the guys with high average. I could go to Aaron and Mays and Mano and Clemente and DiMaggio and all those guys, Fox. But I like those guys that had the high averages. So obviously Cobb's 366, Hornsby, he's up there. I did Ted Williams, he had the 344, Ruth, 342. These are high average guys. Then I looked at Speaker because he had 345, and then I did Delahanty's at 346. Musial was at 331, and Gwynn was at 338. But who's up there, really up there in high average? And Gehrig, 340. So who's up there? You know a guy that interests me? George Sisler. Why? All right, well, let's put him in here. Let's see. Sisler, career batting average leaders. Okay, go to Baseball Reference. George Sisler, .340 career batting average. Now, there are guys ahead of him like Keeler, Heilman, Brothers, Hamilton, Lefty O'Doul, Joe Jackson. Problem with some of those guys, not a long enough career, but George Sisler, 15 years. You know what? In a 15-year period, he got 2,800 hits. 340. I'm gonna do him. I'm gonna start a new series. George Sisler. I've got his book. Let's look at all his box scores. Let's look at each season, see how it performed. He had 2 seasons of 400. See, that's why I'm not going to Aaron and Mays yet. Aaron and Mays didn't have 400 seasons, but they did have the homers and the RBIs, I'll give you that. And they did have the career hits. But they're not up there in average. So I want to get these high average guys out of the way, okay? So next video, George Sisler will start with his first season, and we'll go through his 15-year career. Talk to you later. I'm out.